Absolutely not. Thorne Westmoreland's voice cut through the mahogany-paneled study like a blade. He towered before the massive windows overlooking Havelock Bay, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the Connecticut coastline. There will be no negotiation on these terms, Miss Blackwood. Serenity Blackwood clutched her portfolio tighter against her chest. The job offer had seemed too good to be true. Private librarian to one of America's wealthiest men, cataloging a collection of rare books worth millions. Now she understood why the position had remained vacant for months. Mr. Westmoreland, with all due respect, some of these conditions are rather— she searched for the right word— unusual. Thorne turned, his steel-gray eyes appraising her with cold calculation. At 32, he'd built upon his family's fortune with ruthless precision, earning him the nickname the Heartless Westmoreland in business circles. You come highly recommended for your expertise in historical documents and ancient contract law, Miss Blackwood. But this position requires discretion above all else. He picked up the contract from his desk and flipped to the third page. Rule 1. You will never enter the east wing of the mansion under any circumstances. Rule 2. You will never inquire about my personal affairs or family history. Rule 3. You will appear only when summoned and leave promptly when dismissed. Serenity shifted uncomfortably. The salary was triple what she earned at the university library, enough to finally pay off her student loans and help her adoptive parents save their struggling bookstore. But these stipulations felt medieval. And Rule 4. Thorne continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Under no circumstances will you develop any personal attachment to me. A startled laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. Mr. Westmoreland, I assure you that won't be an issue. Something flickered across his face. Amusement? Annoyance? It vanished too quickly to read. You'd be surprised, Miss Blackwood. Many women find wealth and power irresistible. I'm not many women, Serenity replied, raising her chin. I'm here for the books, not the billionaire. Thorne's assistant, Grayson, who had been standing silently by the door, coughed discreetly. Thorne shot him a warning glance before returning his attention to Serenity. Regardless, those are my terms. You'll have full access to my collection, one of the finest assemblages of pre-colonial American legal documents and first-edition classics in private hands. You'll be compensated generously. In exchange, you follow my rules without question. Serenity weighed her options. The professional opportunity alone was career-defining, and something about the forbidden East Wing called to her scholarly instincts. What secrets could be hidden there that warranted such explicit prohibition? You'll have your own suite in the West Wing. Thorne continued when she remained silent. Mrs. Wilkins, the housekeeper, will show you to your quarters if you accept. And if I break these rules? Serenity asked, immediately regretting the question. Thorne's expression hardened. Immediate termination, without reference. He extended the fountain pen toward her, his family's crest emblazoned on its gold cap. So, Miss Blackwood, do we have an agreement? Serenity stared at the contract. Everything in her training as a historical document specialist screamed that she should read every line before signing. But something else, curiosity, desperation, or perhaps the intensity of Thorne's gaze, made her reach for the pen. I accept your terms, Mr. Westmoreland. She signed with a flourish, feeling as though she'd just sealed a Faustian bargain. Excellent. Thorne's lips curved into what might have been a smile on anyone else. On him, it looked predatory. Grayson will provide you with security clearance and keys to the appropriate areas. You begin tomorrow. As Grayson led her from the study, Serenity glanced back to see Thorne watching her, his expression unreadable. You're either very brave or very foolish, Grayson murmured as they walked down the corridor. He's gone through 3 librarians in the past year. What happened to them? Serenity asked. They broke his rules. Grayson stopped before an imposing set of doors. This is the main library. Your domain now. He pushed them open to reveal a 2-story wonderland of books that took Serenity's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling shelves stretched upward, accessible by rolling ladders and a wrought iron mezzanine. Display cases held illuminated manuscripts. The scent of leather bindings and parchment filled the air. It's magnificent, she whispered. Yes, came Thorne's voice from behind them, making her jump. And it holds secrets worth protecting. He stepped past her into the library, his proximity sending an inexplicable shiver down her spine. Remember, Miss Blackwood, he said quietly. Curiosity has consequences. As his footsteps faded down the hallway, Serenity looked around at her new workplace, excitement and trepidation warring within her. Whatever Thorne Westmoreland was hiding, whatever ghosts haunted the East Wing, she had just signed away her right to discover them. But Serenity Blackwood had never been particularly good at following rules. 3 weeks into her employment at Westmoreland Manor, Serenity had settled into a rhythm. Each morning, she arrived at the main library by 7, cataloging priceless volumes until evening. Thorne rarely appeared, communicating primarily through terse emails or through Grayson. Today she was working on a collection of 18th-century legal documents pertaining to maritime trade disputes. Rain lashed against the library windows as a late autumn storm battered the Connecticut coastline. The mansion creaked and whispered around her. Serenity checked her watch, nearly 9 at night. She'd been so absorbed in a particularly fascinating contract case that she'd lost track of time. Standing to stretch, she decided to return the documents to the archive room before heading to her suite. The corridors were dimly lit and labyrinthine. Serenity took a wrong turn, finding herself in an unfamiliar hallway. The architectural style subtly shifted, darker wood, heavier drapes, older portraits lining the walls. With creeping realization, she recognized where she was. The East Wing. She should turn back immediately. Rule 1. Never enter the East Wing. But something about a portrait at the end of the hall caught her attention. A woman with striking features similar to Thorne's, but with warmer eyes. Before she could reconsider, Serenity walked toward it, drawn by scholarly instinct. The woman wore an emerald necklace that matched her eyes. The brass plaque beneath read, Eleanor Westmoreland, 1985 to 2008. Thorne's mother, Serenity whispered, doing the math. She would have died when Thorne was 15. A door stood ajar just beyond the portrait. Serenity pushed it open to reveal what appeared to be a preserved bedroom. Feminine touches still evident in the decor, untouched by time. A layer of dust covered everything. On the nightstand sat a silver frame with a partially torn photograph, half of it missing. What remained showed Eleanor Westmoreland smiling, her arm extending around someone who had been torn away. What exactly do you think you're doing? Thorne's voice cracked through the room like thunder. Serenity whirled around, nearly dropping the frame. I got lost, she stammered. I was returning documents and took a wrong turn. Put that down. His voice was deadly quiet. She carefully replaced the frame. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. Thorne crossed the room in 3 strides, looming over her. Rule 1, Miss Blackwood. The very first rule. I know. I apologize. She lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated despite her racing heart. Was this your mother's room? His jaw tightened. Rule 2. No personal questions. 23 is young to lose a parent, Serenity persisted. I lost mine too. Well, my birth parents. I never knew them. I was adopted as an infant. Something in Thorne's expression shifted. The fury remained, but now layered with something else. Surprise, perhaps. That doesn't give you the right to invade my privacy, he said, but the edge had dulled from his voice. No, it doesn't, she agreed. But preserving history is my profession, Mr. Westmoreland. This room, it's a time capsule. She gestured to the undisturbed space. Someone wanted to keep her memory exactly as it was. Thorne's gaze swept the room as if seeing it through new eyes. My father's decision. After she died, he locked this wing and fired anyone who entered it. When he passed 5 years ago, I maintained the tradition. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Instead of anger, exhaustion crossed his features. Because some memories are better left undisturbed, Miss Blackwood. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark white. In that brief moment, Serenity saw vulnerability in Thorne's face that vanished when darkness returned. Your mother was beautiful, she said quietly. You have her eyes. Thorne stiffened. You should go. What happened to her? You're determined to break every rule in a single evening, aren't you? His voice held no anger now, only weariness. Serenity reached for the doorknob. I'll return to my quarters. Again, I apologize for the intrusion. Wait. The command stopped her. Since you're so intent on knowing, my mother took her own life in this room. I found her. The brutal honesty stunned Serenity into silence. She left no note, no explanation. He continued, his voice detached, clinical. Just debts and scandal that my father spent years covering up. That's the Westmoreland legacy I protect with my rules, Miss Blackwood. I'm sorry, she whispered, meaning it. Thorne moved to the window, his back to her. Now you know why this wing is forbidden. Satisfied? No one should have to face that alone, especially not a child. She took a step toward him, then stopped herself. I won't mention it again, nor will I return here. He turned, studying her face as if searching for mockery or pity. Finding neither, he nodded once. See that you don't. The storm chose that moment to knock out the power. Darkness enveloped them completely. Perfect, Thorne muttered. Serenity felt her way toward where she thought the door was, but collided with something solid. Thorne, moving in the same direction. His hands steadied her, gripping her shoulders. Sorry, they said simultaneously. Neither moved. In the pitch blackness, other senses heightened. She could smell his cologne, cedar and something spicier. Feel the warmth radiating from him. Hear his breathing, slightly faster than normal. We should, she began. Yes, he agreed, releasing her abruptly as emergency lights flickered on, bathing the room in dim blue. The strange moment broken, Thorne led the way from the room, closing the door firmly behind them. They walked in silence through the forbidden wing until reaching the main foyer. Grayson will escort you to your suite, Thorne said, nodding to his assistant who materialized as if summoned. Good night, Miss Blackwood. Good night, Mr. Westmoreland, she replied. As she followed Grayson up the grand staircase, Serenity glanced back. Thorne remained in the foyer, watching her departure with an expression she couldn't decipher. One rule broken, and somehow she was still employed. But more than that, she'd glimpsed behind Thorne Westmoreland's carefully constructed walls. And what she'd seen there intrigued her far more than any rare book in his collection. This isn't what I typically wear to black tie events, Serenity muttered, examining her reflection in the full-length mirror. The midnight blue gown Thorne had sent to her sweet-hugged curves she normally concealed beneath cardigans and slacks. The Westmoreland Foundation's annual charity gala wasn't how she'd planned to spend her Saturday night. But Thorne's email had been clear. Her presence was required to discuss the collection with potential donors. Professional reasons only. A knock at her door revealed Mrs. Wilkins, the housekeeper. You look lovely, dear, the older woman said. Mr. Westmoreland is waiting in the foyer. Serenity followed Mrs. Wilkins through the mansion's winding corridors, anxiety building with each step. Since their encounter in the East Wing 2 weeks ago, Thorne had been polite but distant, their interactions limited to formal emails about the cataloging project. Thorne stood at the bottom of the grand staircase in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, checking his watch. When he looked up, something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps appreciation, before his expression returned to its usual mask of detached professionalism. Miss Blackwood, he acknowledged, his eyes lingering a moment before returning to his watch. We're running late. The drive to the Hartford Convention Center passed in tense silence. Only when they reached the venue did Thorne finally speak. Several important clients will be attending tonight. The foundation supports literacy programs across New England, and our rare book collection is a point of pride. Answer their questions, but remember, no personal information, Serenity finished. I understand my role, Mr. Westmoreland. His lips twitched, almost a smile. Indeed. The ballroom was a sea of wealth and power. Champagne flowed freely as Connecticut's elite networked beneath crystal chandeliers. Thorne guided Serenity through the crowd with a light touch at her back, introducing her to trustees and benefactors. She was explaining the historical significance of their recent acquisition, a previously undiscovered letter from John Adams, when a sharp voice cut through the conversation. Thorne, darling, playing librarian these days. A striking blonde in a crimson gown approached, her smile predatory. Beside her stood an older man with silver temples and cold eyes. Callista, Thorne acknowledged stiffly. Maxwell, I wasn't aware you were on the guest list. The Harrington family has always supported literacy, Maxwell said smoothly, though our methods differ from the Westmorelands. Callista extended a manicured hand to Serenity. Callista Harrington. Thorne and I were engaged last spring, before he developed his unusual interests. Her gaze flicked dismissively over Serenity. Serenity Blackwood, she replied, accepting the handshake. Historical document specialist. Mr. Westmoreland hired me for my expertise, not my company." "How refreshing," Callista said with mock sincerity. "Though I must say, Thorn, she's hardly your usual type. So unpolished." Thorn stepped forward slightly. "Miss Blackwood has more intelligence and integrity than most people in this room. Qualities you might consider cultivating, Callista." The blonde's smile froze. Maxwell Harrington placed a restraining hand on his daughter's arm. "We'll speak later, Westmoreland," he said, steering Callista away. "Family matters to discuss." As they departed, Serenity noticed something odd. Maxwell Harrington staring at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She absently rubbed her birthmark, a crescent-shaped mark on her wrist normally hidden by her watch band, which she'd removed for the evening. "I apologize for that unpleasantness," Thorn said, guiding her toward the bar. "The Harringtons and Westmorelands have a complicated history." "She called me your usual type, implying I'm unusual," Serenity observed. "Should I be flattered or insulted?" A genuine smile crossed Thorn's face, transforming his features. "Definitely flattered. Callisto assumes everyone shares her shallow values." He ordered them drinks, then added, "Thank you for defending yourself. Most people cower before the Harringtons." "I grew up in foster care before my adoption," she replied. "I learned early to stand my ground." Thorn studied her with new interest. Before he could respond, an elderly gentleman approached them. "Miss Blackwood?" "Elias Blackburn. I sit on the Foundation's board." His eyes twinkled warmly. "Thorn tells me you're working wonders with the collection." "Mr. Blackburn was my father's closest friend," Thorn explained. "He's one of the few who remembers the collection in its original glory. Before the Harrington lawsuit nearly destroyed it," Elias added, his expression darkening. 20 years of litigation over ownership rights ended only when Eleanor." He stopped abruptly, glancing at Thorn. "It's all right, Elias," Thorn said quietly. "Miss Blackwood is aware of my mother's passing." Elias nodded sadly. The settlement with Maxwell Harrington was signed the week before Eleanor died. "Some say the terms broke her spirit." "That's enough ancient history," Thorn interrupted. "We're celebrating tonight, not mourning." "Of course, my boy." Elias patted Thorn's shoulder affectionately before turning to Serenity. "You must join us for the board luncheon next month. We'd love your insights on the collection's future." After Elias departed, Thorn guided Serenity toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. "I apologize for Elias dredging up old business." "You don't need to apologize," she said. "Though I'm curious, what was the lawsuit about?" Thorn's jaw tightened, but surprisingly, he answered. "The Harringtons claim my grandfather stole rare volumes that rightfully belonged to their family. My mother inherited the legal battle along with the collection." Throughout the evening, Serenity found herself repeatedly distracted by Maxwell Harrington's stare. During a momentary lull, she noticed him examining his own wrist, where a crescent-shaped birthmark identical to hers was partially visible beneath his cufflink. The coincidence unsettled her deeply. As the gala concluded, Thorn surprised her by inviting her to walk through the convention center's sculpture garden. Under the stars, surrounded by modern art installations, he seemed different, less guarded. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said, hands in his pockets as they strolled. "Better than I expected." "What did you expect?" "That I'd embarrass you. That you'd be uncomfortable. This isn't exactly the natural habitat of academic researchers." "We're not all socially awkward bookworms," she countered with a smile. "Though I admit, wealth like this, it's a different world." They paused before a twisted metal sculpture representing human connection. In the moonlight, Thorn's expression softened. "Sometimes I envy you," he admitted. "Your freedom from legacy and expectation." "The grass is always greener," she replied. "Growing up not knowing where you come from, who you are, has its own burdens." They stood in comfortable silence until Thorn checked his watch. "It's late. We should go." During the drive back to the estate, Serenity gathered her courage. "Thank you for defending me to Callista Harrington. You didn't have to do that." Thorn kept his eyes on the road. "I merely stated facts." But as they pulled into the mansion's circular drive, he turned to her. "Serenity," he said, using her first name for the first time. "Be careful around the Harringtons. Especially Maxwell. There's more history there than you know." She nodded, wondering what he wasn't telling her, and why Maxwell Harrington had looked at her with such disturbing recognition. Serenity couldn't stop thinking about Maxwell Harrington's birthmark. For a week after the gala, the coincidence plagued her, breaking her concentration as she worked. She'd always attributed her own crescent-shaped mark to random chance. Now she wasn't so sure. The library was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Thorne had been absent for 3 days on a business trip to Boston, leaving her with uninterrupted access to the collection. She should have been thrilled. Instead, she found herself drawn to books mentioning the Harrington family. Breaking from her cataloging, she pulled a leather-bound volume from a high shelf, a regional history of Connecticut's founding families. The chapter on the Harringtons was brief but informative. Railroad money, political connections, a penchant for scandal quietly buried with influence and wealth. A notation in the margin caught her eye, handwritten in faded ink. E.W. See Locked Drawer Re. MH Connection, April 1999. E.W. Eleanor Westmoreland. M.H. Maxwell Harrington. Serenity glanced at the library door. Grayson wasn't due to check on her progress for hours. This was clearly a violation of Rule 2, no inquiring about personal affairs. But professional curiosity was different, wasn't it? This was historical research. The desk in the corner of the library had belonged to Thorne's grandfather. Its ornate drawers had yielded treasures over the past month: maps, correspondence, research notes. But one drawer remained stubbornly locked, its keyhole an antique design that modern keys wouldn't fit. Serenity returned to her cataloging, trying to focus on the task at hand. She was midway through a first-edition Thoreau when the book fell open to reveal a hidden cutout in the pages. Inside lay a small brass key. Her heart raced. For a moment, she considered leaving it untouched, but the researcher in her couldn't resist. The key fit the locked drawer perfectly. Inside lay a slim folder labeled Harrington Dispute, and beneath it, a small leather journal with Eleanor Westmoreland's initials embossed on the cover. "This is wrong," Serenity whispered to herself, but her hands were already opening the folder. Inside were legal documents detailing the settlement between the Westmorelands and Harringtons. Complex terms transferring partial ownership of certain assets to Harrington Holdings, signed the week before Eleanor's death. But more interesting was a half-burned adoption certificate tucked between the pages. The child's name and birth date, April 8, 1999, were visible, but the parent's information was lost to fire damage. Beneath it lay correspondence between Maxwell Harrington and someone named Vivian. The letters were clearly personal, referencing a relationship that needed to remain hidden. "He'll destroy us both if he discovers the truth," one letter read. "I can't keep this child, Maxwell. Your wife, your reputation, you've made your choice clear." Serenity's hands trembled. April 8, 1999. Her birthday. The sound of the library door opening sent her into panicked motion. She shoved the documents back into the drawer, turned the key, and slipped it into her pocket in one fluid movement. Thorne stood in the doorway, looking travel-worn but alert. "Miss Blackwood, making progress." She forced a smile, hoping her face didn't betray her. "Mr. Westmoreland, I didn't expect you back until tomorrow." Meetings concluded early. He crossed to her desk, glancing at her cataloging notes. "You've been busy. The Emerson collection is fascinating," she said, gesturing to the books spread before her. "His marginalia provides insight into his revision process." "That wasn't what I hired you to catalog this week," Thorne observed, picking up the regional history book she'd left open on the side table. Serenity's mouth went dry. "I was cross-referencing local context." Thorne flipped through the pages, stopping at the Harrington section. His expression darkened when he saw the handwritten note. "My mother's handwriting." "I noticed," Serenity admitted, deciding honesty was safer than deception. "The Harringtons seemed quite interested in your collection at the gala. I was curious about the history." Thorne closed the book with deliberate care. "Professional curiosity or personal?" "Both," she admitted. "When you warned me to be careful around them, especially Maxwell Harrington, it seemed prudent to understand why." Thorne's gaze was penetrating. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "Not entirely," she hedged. He set the book down and moved to the window, his back to her. Several long moments passed before he spoke again. "The Harringtons are dangerous, Serenity. Not in obvious ways. They don't threaten or assault. They manipulate, they undermine, they destroy from within. Like they did with your mother?" He turned, surprise evident in his expression. "What do you know about that?" "Only what Elias Blackburn mentioned at the gala, that the settlement was signed the week before her death." Thorne's shoulders slumped slightly. He looked younger suddenly, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. My father was the businessman. My mother was the scholar. This collection was her passion. He gestured around the library. The Harringtons knew that. When they couldn't acquire it legitimately, they found other methods. What methods? Thorne hesitated, clearly warring with himself over how much to reveal. Maxwell Harrington used people's weaknesses against them. My mother had several. Her generosity, her trust, her depression. That's why you have the rules, Serenity realized. To prevent anyone from getting close enough to manipulate you. His silence was confirmation enough. I appreciate the academic interest in my family's history, he said finally. But some things are better left buried, Serenity. The use of her first name again wasn't lost on her, nor was the way he studied her face, as if trying to solve a puzzle. You're different from the others, he said unexpectedly. The other librarians? The other people who've tried to get close to me or my family's legacy. He moved toward her, stopping closer than professional boundaries would dictate. What is it you really want here? Knowledge, she answered honestly. Understanding. Isn't that what any researcher wants? Is it? His voice had dropped lower. Nothing more personal? Her heartbeat quickened. I didn't come here looking for anything beyond professional opportunity. And now, he was close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. Now I'm not sure, she admitted. The atmosphere between them changed, charged with something neither of them had acknowledged. Thorne reached out slowly, as if giving her time to retreat, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Rule 4, he murmured. No personal attachments. You made the rules, she whispered. You can break them. For a breathless moment, she thought he might. Instead, he stepped back, composure returning like a shield sliding into place. I made them for a reason. He straightened his cuffs, a nervous gesture she'd never seen from him before. Good night, Miss Blackwood. Thorne, she called as he reached the door. He paused without turning. The rules protect you from being hurt, but they also keep you from living. He remained still for a long moment. Some prices are worth paying for security. After he left, Serenity sank into her chair, the brass key heavy in her pocket. She had crossed lines tonight, professional and personal, discovered secrets that raised more questions than answers. The adoption certificate, the letters, the Harrington birthmark identical to her own. These weren't coincidences. They were pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to assemble. And somewhere in that puzzle lay the truth about who she really was. Serenity stared at her phone, reading Thorne's text message for the 5th time. Join me for dinner. 7 p.m. We need to discuss the Harrington documents. 2 weeks had passed since their charged encounter in the library. 2 weeks of professional politeness masking the undercurrent between them. 2 weeks of her secretly continuing her research into the Harrington connection, piecing together fragments of a story that increasingly seemed to involve her own history. At precisely 7, she arrived at the mansion's formal dining room to find it empty except for Thorne, who stood by the fireplace nursing a scotch. I thought we might be more comfortable in my private quarters, he said without preamble. Fewer ears. She followed him through rarely used corridors to a section of the mansion she hadn't explored, his personal suite. The living area was surprisingly understated, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather furniture, and large windows overlooking the bay. You seem nervous, Thorne observed, pouring her a glass of wine. The last time we discussed the Harringtons, things became complicated. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Indeed. He gestured to the sofa. Please sit. He remained standing, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I've been unfair to you, he finally said, surrounding you with mysteries while forbidding you to investigate them. It's cruel to someone with your natural curiosity. Why the change of heart? Because I looked into you, Serenity. His directness startled her. Your background, your adoption, the timing. Her pulse quickened. And what did you find? Nothing conclusive, but enough to warrant a discussion. He sat across from her. You were adopted through New Haven Children's Services in June 1999, correct? Yes. My birth mother surrendered me anonymously. The adoption records were sealed. 2 months after my mother died. 2 months after the Harrington settlement was signed. Thorne leaned forward. And you have the same crescent birthmark as Maxwell Harrington. Serenity set down her wine glass to hide her trembling hands. You noticed that too. At the gala. It's a distinctive mark. Thorne's eyes held hers. There's more. The night before my mother died, She told my father she had evidence that would destroy Maxwell Harrington. Evidence of betrayal beyond financial malfeasance. What kind of betrayal? She never specified. The next morning, she was gone. Pain flashed across his face. Whatever she discovered died with her. Or was destroyed afterward, Serenity suggested. The half-burned adoption certificate I found. Thorne nodded grimly. Someone tried to erase that connection. The implications hung between them. Serenity forced herself to voice the question she'd been avoiding for weeks. You think I might be related to the Harringtons, don't you? I think it's possible Maxwell Harrington fathered a child with someone named Vivian in 1999. A child who was surrendered for adoption around the time of my mother's death. Serenity's world tilted. That's why he stared at me. He recognized himself in me. It would explain his reaction. Thorne poured himself another scotch. But without DNA testing, it remains speculation. Why are you telling me this now? What changed? Thorne set down his glass and moved to sit beside her on the sofa. Because I'm breaking my own rules, Serenity. I care what happens to you. And if you are Maxwell Harrington's daughter, you're in danger. From whom? From Maxwell himself. From Callista. From anyone who might use you as leverage in the ongoing feud between our families. He was closer now, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the concern in his eyes. There's something between us, he continued, voice low. Something I've tried to deny, but I can't stand the thought of you being hurt because of your connection to me or to the Harringtons. Serenity's heart raced. So what happens now? Now I break Rule 4 completely. His hand moved to cup her cheek. If you want me to. The kiss, when it came, was gentle at first, then hungry with weeks of restrained desire. Serenity's fingers tangled in his hair as he pulled her closer, professional boundaries disintegrating between them. Later, lying in Thorne's bed with her head on his chest, Serenity traced patterns on his skin. What does this mean for us? It means I trust you, he murmured, kissing her forehead. More than I've trusted anyone in a very long time. The following weeks unfolded in a blur of secret rendezvous and stolen moments. By day, they maintained professional distance. By night, they explored each other's bodies and shared pieces of their histories. Thorne revealed more about his mother's struggles with depression, his father's emotional distance, his own determination to protect what remained of his family legacy. Serenity shared stories of her childhood with loving but financially struggling adoptive parents, her academic ambitions, her lifelong search for identity. But even as they grew closer, Serenity continued her clandestine investigation. Using her expertise in historical documents, she traced property transfers between the Westmoreland and Harrington families, uncovering a pattern of suspicious transactions coinciding with Eleanor's death. She discovered that Callista's mother had died the same year as Eleanor, another alleged suicide that had been quickly hushed up. And she found references to someone named Vivian Lambert, who had worked as Maxwell's executive assistant during that period before disappearing from public record. One evening, as Serenity was leaving the public records office in New Haven, a text from an unknown number appeared on her phone. I know who you are. I can prove it. Meet me at Lighthouse Point tomorrow. 2 p.m. She debated telling Thorne, but decided against it. His protectiveness had grown smothering lately, his insistence that she avoid the Harringtons bordering on obsessive. Just one meeting to learn the truth, then she would share everything with him. The following day, she arrived at the designated meeting spot to find Callista Harrington waiting, elegant even in casual clothes. I wondered if you'd come, Callista said. Curiosity is a powerful motivator. What do you want? To warn you. Callista's typical hostility was absent. Thorne isn't what he seems. Neither is my father. You're caught in a game that began before you were born. I know about Maxwell's affair with Vivian Lambert, Serenity replied. I know I might be his daughter. Callista laughed bitterly. Is that what Thorne told you? That's only part of the truth. She handed Serenity a manila envelope. Everything you need to know is in here. DNA test results. Original records. The truth about your birth and Eleanor Westmoreland's death. Why would you help me? Because I'm tired of living in the shadow of secrets, Callista said, suddenly looking exhausted. And because Thorne knows more than he's telling you. Ask him about the night his mother died. Ask him what he saw. Serenity clutched the envelope. What do you mean? Just read the documents. Then decide who deserves your loyalty. Callista turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Thorne hired a private investigator to research your background weeks before he ever met you. This wasn't chance, Serenity. He's been looking for you for years. That night, Serenity confronted Thorne in his study. The contents of Callista's envelope spread before them. You knew, she accused, voice shaking. You knew who I was before I ever set foot in this house. Thorne's face went blank, his mask sliding into place. I suspected. I wasn't certain. You've been investigating me since 2018, she said, pointing to the private investigator's reports. Why? What am I to you, Thorne? A pawn. Revenge against Maxwell Harrington. It's not what you think. Then what is it? Why didn't you tell me the truth? Thorne's expression hardened. Because the truth is ugly, Serenity. And I wanted to protect you from it. I don't need protection. I need honesty. She gathered the documents. I'm leaving. When you're ready to tell me everything, including what really happened the night your mother died, you know where to find me. His voice stopped her at the door. If you walk out now, you'll regret it. The Harringtons can't be trusted. Right now, she said quietly. Neither can you. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke as Serenity pulled into the parking lot of her modest apartment building. Rain lashed against her windshield, mirroring the turmoil within her. She hadn't been back to her apartment in weeks, having practically moved into the Westmoreland mansion as her relationship with Thorne deepened. Now the small space felt like a stranger's home. Spreading Callista's documents across her kitchen table, Serenity began methodically reviewing each one. The DNA test results confirmed her suspicions. 99.8% probability that Maxwell Harrington was her biological father. A birth certificate listed Vivian Lambert as her mother. Hospital records showed she had been born at a private facility in Vermont, far from prying eyes. Most disturbing was a copy of a life insurance policy taken out on Eleanor Westmoreland 6 months before her death, with Maxwell Harrington as the beneficiary. The policy had a suicide exclusion clause that expired just 2 weeks before Eleanor died. A knock at her door startled her. Through the peephole, she saw Grayson, Thorne's assistant, standing in the hallway, drenched from the rain. Mr. Westmoreland sent me, he said when she opened the door. He's concerned about you. I'm fine, she replied curtly. Tell him not to worry. He also asked me to give you this. Grayson handed her a sealed envelope. He said it explains everything. After Grayson departed, Serenity opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten letter on Westmoreland stationery. Serenity, the night my mother died, I was 15 years old. I couldn't sleep and went to her study past midnight. The door was ajar. Inside, she was arguing with Maxwell Harrington. I heard her accuse him of betraying her trust, of using their friendship for financial gain, of threatening to reveal some secret that would destroy his marriage. When he left, I should have gone to her. Instead, I returned to bed, assuming they would resolve their differences as they always had. By morning, she was gone. For years, I blamed Maxwell for driving her to suicide. I became obsessed with finding evidence of his misdeeds, something that would explain why my mother, who had fought depression her entire life but always found reasons to continue, would choose to leave us. 3 years ago, I discovered references in my father's papers to a child born to Maxwell and his assistant. A child my mother had apparently known about. A child surrendered for adoption around the time of her death. I began searching, believing this child might somehow hold answers about my mother's final days. When your application crossed my desk, the coincidences were too striking to ignore. Your birth date, your expertise in historical documents, even your physical resemblance to the Harringtons. I didn't tell you because I feared you would see yourself as I initially did, a means to an end. But you became so much more than that, Serenity. You became the person who finally made me feel again after years of numbness. Whatever you decide, know that my feelings for you are real. They have nothing to do with your parentage or my quest for answers. If you're willing to hear the complete truth, come to the East Wing. I'll be waiting. Thorne, thunder cracked overhead as Serenity reread the letter. The rational part of her brain warned that this could be another manipulation, but her heart wanted to believe him. Her phone rang, an unknown number. She answered hesitantly. Miss Blackwood, an elderly male voice she didn't recognize. This is Harold Wilson, Eleanor Westmoreland's former attorney. I believe you've been looking into her death. How did you get my number? Elias Blackburn suggested I contact you. He's concerned about your welfare. A chill ran down Serenity's spine. Why would he be concerned? Because the last person who looked this deeply into Eleanor's death was Eleanor herself. Harold's voice grew grave. And it got her killed. You don't believe she committed suicide? I know she didn't. I spoke with her the morning she allegedly took her life. She was planning to expose Maxwell Harrington's financial crimes and had discovered something else, something she called unforgivable. She was coming to my office with evidence. What evidence? I don't know. She never arrived. Harold paused. But she mentioned a child. Maxwell's child with his assistant. She believed the child was in danger. Serenity's grip tightened on the phone. Me. She was trying to protect me. If you are that child, Miss Blackwood, then you need to be extremely careful. Especially around Thorne Westmoreland. Thorne? What? Because Eleanor's last words to me were that her son had discovered something terrible. Something that had changed him. She feared what he might do. The line went dead, leaving Serenity in stunned silence. Outside, the storm intensified, wind howling around the building's corners. Her mind raced. Thorne had been 15 when Eleanor died, old enough to understand what was happening, young enough to be profoundly traumatized by it. What had he discovered? What had changed him? The truth, she realized, lay in the East Wing, in Eleanor's preserved bedroom where everything had begun between them. Despite the danger, despite her misgivings, Serenity found herself driving back to the Westmoreland mansion through sheets of rain. The wrought iron gates stood open as if expecting her, the long driveway illuminated by lightning flashes. The mansion loomed dark except for lights in the East Wing. Serenity parked and ran through the downpour to the side entrance, using the key Thorne had given her weeks ago. The corridors were eerily silent as she made her way to Eleanor's bedroom. The door stood ajar, warm light spilling into the hallway. Thorne sat on the edge of his mother's bed, a leather-bound journal open in his hands. He looked up as she entered, his face haggard with exhaustion and grief. You came, he said simply. I need the truth, Thorne. All of it. He nodded, closing the journal. My mother didn't commit suicide, Serenity. She was murdered. The blunt statement hung in the air between them. How do you know? Because I saw it happen. His voice was hollow, devoid of emotion. I came to her room that morning to apologize for eavesdropping the night before. The door was unlocked. Inside, my mother was struggling with someone, a man forcing pills down her throat, holding her until she stopped moving. Horror washed over Serenity. Maxwell Harrington? That's what I believed for years. Thorne's hands tightened on the journal. But it wasn't Maxwell. Then who? My father. The revelation struck like physical blow. Serenity steadied herself against the doorframe. Your father killed Eleanor? What? Money. Power. The same reasons behind most crimes in families like ours. Thorne's voice was bitter. My mother had discovered he'd been embezzling from the family foundation. Millions diverted to offshore accounts. She was planning to expose him, along with his partnership with Maxwell Harrington. And you saw this happen? At 15. Thorne nodded, his expression haunted. I was too shocked to intervene. Too terrified. By the time I realized what was happening, she was gone. And my father was staring at me, telling me that no one would believe me if I spoke out. That he'd claim I was disturbed, traumatized, imagining things. So you stayed silent. It wasn't a question. For years, I buried the memory so deeply I almost convinced myself it hadn't happened. He held up the journal. Until I found this last year, after my father died. My mother's diary, detailing her suspicions about both my father and Maxwell Harrington, and her discovery of Maxwell's child. You, whom she believed deserved protection from both families. Serenity moved cautiously to sit beside him on the bed. Why did you really hire me, Thorne? Was it just to find answers about your mother's death? Initially, yes, he admitted. I thought Maxwell might have arranged my mother's murder to protect his secrets. I wanted evidence connecting him to her death. And when you realized it was your father? By then, I'd already fallen in love with you. The words were simple, unadorned. The investigation didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was protecting you from the truth about your heritage, from becoming a pawn in the Harrington-Westmoreland feud. That wasn't your decision to make, she said gently. I have the right to know who I am. I know that now. He took her hand. I've spent my life building walls to protect myself from being hurt again. The rules, the distance, the control, they were my armor. But they also kept me from living, just as you said. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in harsh white light. In that moment, Serenity saw Thorn clearly, not as the cold, controlling billionaire, but as the wounded boy who had never healed from his childhood trauma. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now we face Maxwell Harrington together," Thorn said, determination replacing the hollow grief in his voice. "He may not have killed my mother, but he's still responsible for financial crimes that nearly destroyed my family. And he abandoned you, his own daughter, to protect his reputation. And us." She hardly dared ask. Thorn's hand tightened around hers. "That depends on whether you can forgive me for not telling you the whole truth from the beginning. I understand why you kept it from me," she said slowly. "But no more secrets, Thorn. No more rules. If we do this, if we're together, it has to be as equals." "Equals," he agreed, bringing her hand to his lips. "No more rules." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within Eleanor's room, something broken had begun to heal. The Westmoreland estate belongs to Harrington Holdings. It's all here in black and white. Maxwell Harrington slid the document across the polished conference table with the confidence of a man accustomed to victory. His legal team flanked him like an honor guard, while Callista watched from the corner with calculating eyes. Thorn remained impassive, but Serenity noticed the slight tightening of his jaw, the only indication of the fury he contained. They had expected this move, but not so soon. "This agreement was signed under duress," Thorn replied evenly, "by a woman suffering from clinical depression who died shortly afterward. Any court would question its validity." Maxwell's smile never wavered. "Your mother was of sound mind when she signed. We have her doctor's certification. And this particular clause, transferring ownership of the estate should the Westmoreland Foundation ever face financial impropriety charges, is quite specific." Serenity watched the theatrics with a scholar's detachment. 3 days had passed since Thorn's confession in the East Wing. 3 days of strategic planning, of combing through historical documents, of preparing for this confrontation. "The timing is convenient," she observed. "Filing fraud charges against the Westmoreland Foundation just weeks after Thorn rejected your acquisition offer." Maxwell's attention shifted to her, his gaze clinically assessing. The same crescent birthmark that adorned her wrist was visible on his as he adjusted his cufflinks. "Miss Blackwood, I've been looking forward to meeting you properly." His tone was cordial, but Serenity wasn't fooled. Thorn seems to have a habit of hiding behind women when cornered. "Like mother, like son." "I'm not hiding behind anyone," Thorn interjected. "And these fraud allegations are baseless. The Foundation's finances are transparent. Your father's embezzlement is well documented in the files we've submitted to the SEC," Callista said, speaking for the first time. $10 million, diverted over 6 years. The clause in Eleanor's agreement is clear. Any evidence of financial misconduct triggers immediate transfer of property rights. Serenity glanced at Thorn, who gave her an imperceptible nod. This was the moment they had prepared for. "I'd like to examine the original agreement," she said, extending her hand toward Maxwell. He hesitated before signaling to his attorney, who produced a document sleeve containing the contract Eleanor had signed 23 years ago. Serenity handled it with the care of a museum curator, her trained eye assessing the paper stock, the ink composition, the binding method. She wore white cotton gloves, partly for document preservation, partly for theatrical effect. "Interesting," she murmured, examining the signature page under a portable magnifier she'd brought for this purpose. "Very interesting indeed. Is there a problem?" Maxwell's confidence showed its first crack. "Several, actually." Serenity looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "This document has been altered. The clause regarding financial impropriety was added after the original signing." "That's absurd," Callista scoffed. "You can't possibly determine that from a visual inspection." "I can when I have the original drafts for comparison." Serenity nodded to Thorn, who opened a leather portfolio and extracted several pages sealed in archival sleeves. These were found in Eleanor Westmoreland's personal files. Preliminary drafts showing the agreement's evolution. The financial misconduct clause doesn't appear in any of them. Maxwell's attorney leaned over to whisper urgently in his ear. The confidence in Maxwell's expression wavered but didn't break. "Even if true, it doesn't invalidate the final agreement," he insisted. Eleanor initialed every page. She initialed the pages she reviewed, Serenity corrected. "But the paper stock on page 17, where this clause appears, is different from the rest of the document. Slightly whiter, slightly newer. The ink used for her initials on that page contains chemical markers not introduced until 2010, 7 years after her death. The room fell silent. Even Callista looked shocked, her gaze darting between her father and the documents. Furthermore, Serenity continued. Under colonial-era property law, which still governs certain historical estates in Connecticut, including this one, any transfer agreement signed under deception is void ab initio. This principle was established in the Harkness versus Winthrop case of 1789, which I believe Mr. Blackburn is prepared to argue before the state Supreme Court if necessary. On cue, Elias Blackburn entered the conference room, accompanied by Harold Wilson, Eleanor's former attorney, and 2 other distinguished legal professionals. We filed motions to freeze all proceedings until the authenticity of this agreement can be verified by independent experts, Elias announced. The court granted our request this morning. Maxwell's complexion darkened. This is a delaying tactic, nothing more. Perhaps, Thorne acknowledged, his voice steady. But it will give us time to present evidence of your own financial irregularities to the SEC. The offshore accounts you and my father established. The tax evasion schemes. The falsified compliance reports. You destroy your own father's reputation? Maxwell challenged. Expose your family to scandal? My father destroyed himself when he murdered my mother, Thorne replied coldly. I have nothing to protect on his behalf. Callista stood abruptly. You're bluffing. You have no proof of any of this. We have Eleanor's journals, Serenity countered. We have financial records she preserved before her death. And we have something else, an original recording of your father threatening Eleanor the night before she died. This was their gambit, the one piece of evidence they couldn't actually produce. Thorne had no recording, only his memory of the argument he'd overheard. But Maxwell didn't know that. The color drained from Maxwell's face. You're lying. The mansion's security system was state-of-the-art, even in 2001, Thorne said smoothly. Audio backups were stored offline. I discovered them recently during renovations. Maxwell pushed back from the table, composure cracking. This meeting is over. We'll continue through proper legal channels. Before you go, Serenity said, there's one more matter to address. She removed a document from her folder and placed it before him. A DNA test confirming you're my biological father. The conference room went deadly silent. Maxwell stared at the results, then at Serenity, naked shock replacing calculated control. How did you? Your water glass from our previous meeting, Thorne explained. You should be more careful with your DNA, Maxwell. Callista approached the table, examining the test results. Is this some kind of joke? She demanded, looking from her father to Serenity. No joke, Serenity replied calmly. I'm your half-sister, Callista. Born April 8, 1999, to Vivian Lambert, your father's executive assistant. That's impossible, Callista whispered, but her eyes told a different story. Pieces falling into place, questions finally answered. Maxwell recovered his composure with visible effort. Whatever you think this proves, it proves you abandoned your own child to protect your reputation, Thorne interrupted. Just as you tried to destroy my mother when she discovered your secret. A secret she was planning to reveal the day she died. I had nothing to do with Eleanor's death, Maxwell insisted, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Perhaps not directly, Harold Wilson said, speaking for the first time. But your threats sent her into the emotional spiral that Charles Westmoreland exploited. You share the moral responsibility, if not the legal one. Maxwell looked cornered, his gaze darting between faces, calculating odds and outcomes as he'd done throughout his business career. What do you want? He finally asked. First, you'll withdraw all claims against the Westmoreland estate and foundation, Thorne replied. Second, you'll resign from Harrington Holdings, turning control over to your daughter. Third, you'll make a public statement acknowledging Serenity as your biological child. You're asking me to commit career suicide, Maxwell growled. I'm offering you a chance to correct past wrongs, Thorne countered. The alternative is a very public legal battle where all your secrets, financial and personal, become court record. Callista stepped forward. Father, we should consider. Be quiet, Maxwell snapped. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me directly, she replied with unexpected steel. If what they're saying is true, if Serenity is your daughter, then I deserve to know. We deserve to know. The unity between father and daughter fractured visibly, another pillar of Maxwell's power crumbling. You have 24 hours to decide, Thorne concluded, gathering the documents. Choose wisely. As they prepared to leave, Maxwell called out to Serenity. Does it feel good? Using your newfound family connection to destroy me. Serenity paused at the door. I'm not trying to destroy you, Mr. Harrington. I'm trying to understand who I am, who I come from. She met his gaze squarely. The destruction is entirely of your own making. Outside, in the privacy of Thorne's car, the adrenaline of confrontation finally caught up with her. Her hands trembled as Thorne took them in his. You were magnificent, he said quietly. I was terrified, she admitted. Do you think he'll agree to the terms? Maxwell Harrington has survived this long by recognizing when he's beaten. Thorne's expression was grim but satisfied. He'll agree, if only to salvage what he can. And Callista? She seemed genuinely shocked. Callista is more complex than I've given her credit for, Thorne acknowledged. Her reaction suggests she didn't know about you. Serenity gazed out at the Manhattan skyline as they drove toward the bridge. For 25 years, I wondered where I came from. Now I know, and it feels disappointing, Thorne suggested. Incomplete, she corrected. Learning about my biological father answers one question, but raises 100 more. About my mother, about the circumstances of my birth, about who I really am. Thorne squeezed her hand. Those are questions we'll answer together, if you'll let me. She turned to him, studying the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. Together, she agreed. No matter what happens with the Harringtons. As they crossed the bridge out of the city, Serenity felt a weight lifting. The past wasn't fully resolved. Perhaps it never would be. But for the first time since discovering her connection to the Harringtons, she felt free to look toward the future. A future with Thorne, beyond the confines of his rules and the shadows of their family secrets. Chapter 8. Rules Rewritten. 6 months after the confrontation with Maxwell Harrington, Serenity stood in the Westmoreland Library, running her fingers along the spines of newly cataloged volumes. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting the room in a warm glow that matched her mood. The library doors opened, and Thorne entered, carrying a stack of newspapers. The press is having a field day, he said, dropping them on her desk. The headlines ranged from sensational to sobering. Harrington Empire changes hands. Billionaire acknowledges secret daughter. Corporate titan steps down amid scandal. Maxwell kept his word, Serenity observed, scanning the articles. He had no choice. Thorne moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Callista made sure of that. The aftermath of their confrontation had unfolded in unexpected ways. Maxwell had indeed resigned from Harrington Holdings, but it was Callista who had forced his hand, threatening to reveal additional financial improprieties if he didn't acknowledge Serenity publicly. The half-sisters had since developed a cautious relationship, not quite friendship, but a mutual respect born of shared history. Have you read Vivian's letter? Thorne asked. Serenity nodded. Finding her birth mother had been surprisingly straightforward once they had Maxwell's cooperation. Vivian Lambert had relocated to Oregon, built a new life, married, and had 2 more children. Her letter to Serenity had been heartfelt but clear. She wasn't seeking to disrupt their respective lives with a reunion, but was open to correspondence. She did what she thought was best, Serenity said. Giving me up for adoption protected me from becoming a pawn in Maxwell's world. Much good that did, Thorne noted wryly. You found your way into that world anyway. On my own terms. She turned in his arms to face him. Speaking of which, I have news. The university accepted my proposal. I'll be heading the new Center for Historical Document Preservation starting next semester. Pride filled Thorne's expression. They'd be fools not to snatch you up. Will you have time, with everything else you're taking on? Everything else included helping Thorne restructure the Westmoreland Foundation to focus on supporting foster children and adoptees searching for their biological families, a cause that had become deeply personal to both of them. I'll make time, she promised. It's important to maintain my independence. Thorne nodded, understanding without need for explanation. Their relationship had evolved beyond the power imbalance of their early days. She was no longer his employee, no longer bound by his rules. They were partners now, equals in every sense. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. a relic from the past that deserves a better future. He withdrew a small velvet box. Inside lay Eleanor Westmoreland's emerald ring, the same one Serenity had admired in her portrait that first night in the East Wing. Thorn, before you answer, he said quickly, you should know what you're getting into. The Westmoreland name comes with baggage. My father's crimes, my mother's death, my own reputation for coldness. People will talk, will question your motives, will assume you're after my fortune. Let them talk, she replied simply. We know the truth. And the truth is that I fell in love with you despite your rules, not because of what you could give me. That we found each other through the darkest chapters of our family's histories and chose to write a different ending. He took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger. Then marry me, Serenity. Not because of who we were born to be, but because of who we've chosen to become together. Yes, she whispered, but on one condition. His eyebrow raised in question. The East Wing, she said. It's time to open it up, to let light and life back into those rooms. Your mother deserves to be remembered, not sealed away like a secret. Thorn was quiet for a long moment, considering. What do you propose? We transform it into the headquarters for the Foundation. Make it a place of healing rather than darkness. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. You've broken every rule I established, you know. Entered forbidden spaces. Asked personal questions. Appeared without being summoned. His lips curved into a smile. And made me fall hopelessly in love with you. Some rules are meant to be broken, she replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. And some need to be rewritten entirely. 3 months later, they married in the garden of the Westmoreland estate, a small ceremony attended by close friends and chosen family. Serenity's adoptive parents beamed with pride. Elias Blackburn, now in remission from cancer, officiated. Even Callisto attended, bringing a reluctant Maxwell who kept his distance but acknowledged his daughter with a nod. As evening fell, Thorn led Serenity to the former East Wing, now transformed with fresh paint and new purpose. The door to Eleanor's bedroom, once the epicenter of so much pain, stood open, converted into a sunlit office where framed photographs told the story of a woman who had loved books, justice, and her son above all else. On the desk lay a leather-bound volume, a new journal with blank pages waiting to be filled. For our story, Thorn explained, one that begins today. Serenity smiled, taking his hand as they faced their future together, no longer imprisoned by the past, no longer bound by rules written in pain and fear. Only love remained, and it was enough.